everybody. So, we're going to talk about regulation today. I'm Ben Schiller from CoinDesk. I'm the Features and Opinion Editor there. We've got a great panel here to talk about the rather uneven regulatory picture regarding crypto around the world. And I'm going to introduce the panel here and get us started off. So, starting on our left-hand side here is Marcus Benitez. He's from Copper, which is a crypto custody firm. Then we have Ronaldo Lemos. He's from the Schiller Development Foundation. And then we have Ruth Iselema. She's the CEO of Bitmama, which is a crypto exchange platform in Nigeria. So I think when I talk about like the uneven regulatory picture around the world, I mean, it's generally agreed that Europe has kind of the most advanced regulatory framework at the moment with the MiCA law, which is Europe-wide. Then we have the kind of United States on the other side of the picture, which is still living in the shadow of FTX. You know, it's generally agreed that we don't have any legislation there, and it's a lot of regulation by enforcement and by kind of adjudication by the court system, which is very unfair generally to crypto businesses. And then we have a lot of other jurisdictions that we'll mention and talk about. So maybe we can start with you, Marcus, and talk about Copper. So you're based in London and also in Switzerland, and then you also have offices in Singapore and what was the other place?
The US.
The US, right, US. Of course. And so you're in a good kind of position to kind of compare those different jurisdictions. I mean, just talk about the US picture to start with. How is that looking for a crypto business like Copper?
Yeah, well, essentially, I would say, so we established HQ is London. Then I think around the same time we opened the offices in APAC and the US. And yes, you can imagine for everyone, US was for a long time like the biggest hope. As crypto, you know, business, you know, we have the Crypto Valley in Switzerland, but we know that it's no way to compare it, you know, with the Silicon Valley and Crypto Valley that you have in Palo Alto and close. So essentially for us was kind of, I would say, you know, as a company and myself personally, a big disappointment with how the things unfold. I was listening to a podcast today just, you know, to try to, you know, to refresh some concepts on the regulatory side. And one of the points, this podcast was from 2019. And the lawyer was saying, yeah, you know, in the US, we have to decide who is going to be what a regulatory body is going to decide on what. So talking about, you know, the SEC versus CFTC and so on, and yeah, well, fast forward to 2023, and we are still on in the same chapter. So yeah, essentially for the business, what I saw with the clients and prospect clients that we had in the region, essentially many, at least the largest players have to pause, you know, their project. So we are just for the audience. We are more on the institutional side, so we work with we don't work with retail clients. So of course, everything that is linked to regulation and anyone that has a fiduciary duty, they feel first, you know, the weight of the regulation, and in this case, the lack of regulation. Right. So that's why, yeah, back last year after FTX, you know, then with all the demise of the different banks, essentially most of our largest clients have to, at least kind of slow down.
Right.
Yeah.
And you've actually had to close some of the business there on the East Coast.
Yeah, some of it had to, we had to let go some people, unfortunately. But yeah, we have to be lean and ready, you know, to adapt to whatever situation comes. You know.
Right, great. Ronaldo, you're from Brazil. You can talk about that picture there. So talk about the kind of digital public infrastructure that government is building. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, so I'm glad you raised that, because I think there's a lot of talk nowadays about this idea of digital public infrastructure. So a lot of countries are looking into that. I think India is the #1 case. India used its presidency of the G20 in order to push this idea that basically countries have to build their infrastructure that can benefit anyone in terms of public services. India has a very well-known case of building Aadhaar, which is used for identities nationwide. And I think this idea of DPI, it matches perfectly with the idea of public blockchains. So when you look into the case of Brazil, for instance, Brazil achieved very recently a very large digital public infrastructure for payments. So it was built throughout the central bank, and now you can basically make a payment in Brazil instantaneously, countrywide, day or night. And the next step in this effort is basically creating a digital currency for the Brazilian real, but not only creating a CBDC, but creating a smart contract infrastructure for the whole country. So the name of the project is DREX. It's been tested for some time already, and it's probably going to be deployed either next year or the other one. And the idea is precisely that. Brazil, as a low-trust country, you can basically upload your contract to this public infrastructure. And by doing that, you create contracts that are self-enforceable. So it's almost like a national escrow that is pretty smart because you can program anything into it. And in my view, when we look into blockchains, and for instance, Stellar's blockchain, this idea of a digital public infrastructure becomes accessible for anyone. You don't have to be a country like Brazil or the US or India in order to deploy an infrastructure like that. You can rely on a public blockchain, use the infrastructure that is already there, and basically, in my view, this is an important convergence between this idea of a DPI and the blockchain. So this is something I would like to see more. Like when India designed the Aadhaar, they didn't consider blockchains. So if you design a digital identity right now and you use blockchains for that, you can achieve things that were unimaginable when they thought about Aadhaar.
Right. So there's an interesting contrast there between kind of an enabling government and a less enabling government. So Ruth, talk about Nigeria. How is Nigeria approaching regulation of crypto, and how does that affect you as a business?
Okay. So in the case of Nigeria, we have where we see the government trying to do something, right? So we have two different regulatory bodies. We have the central bank, then we have the SEC. And for the central bank, in a way, they've just put out like a blockchain framework, but like there's no execution attached to it. And we have what we call the e-Naira, where I think we're the first African currency, country to launch the e-Naira on the blockchain, but it's like a private permissioned blockchain. It's not really public like what you have in Brazil. And definitely we're also like a low trust society. So a couple of people, or most of the people, don't really trust the government to be able to use that e-Naira to perform their everyday transactions, because there are privacy concerns. The government is seeing what I'm spending on. They know what I'm doing at any point in time, and they could freeze my account. So I think the government still has a lot to do on that side. But in terms of the SEC, then you see some frameworks, especially if you are talking about tokenized assets, or if you want to use assets for investments. Then you have a framework where the SEC gets to regulate you. But generally speaking, the infrastructures are still being built. They are not there yet. Hopefully we'll have them, because even with the AFCTA, I don't know if you've heard of that, where we're trying to get all of Africa to kind of have one currency, and where they can, the same way you have the euro. So that's also having a lot of backlash and going through a couple of challenges, because different, like 54 African countries coming together to say, hey, okay, we'll have something like the euro before we can be able to spend across different countries. And each of these countries have different GDPs, have different cultures, different everything. And Nigeria is like the biggest oil producer in Africa, right? And it's like, hey, I'm the big brother here, and you don't have anything, but we're going to use the same currency. So whatever is going to happen is going, with a smaller country, is going to affect Nigeria. So in the long run, I do hope that we do have that framework or infrastructure, but currently right now, I'm pretty sure the new government is kind of open to either regulating or putting some kind of framework down.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, back to you, Marcus. So you have offices in Singapore and in London and Switzerland. How would you compare those different jurisdictions in terms of its kind of viability for crypto businesses?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, I mean, I'm sitting in Switzerland, heading the business part there. So essentially, I've been there for 10 years. So of course, I started back in 2017 getting into crypto thanks to some colleague from UBS. So I saw how everything developed, over the years. Maybe I think it would be nice to talk about a short story about how Switzerland became what it is today, and why it has been.
Birthplace of Ethereum.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You just catch up on the story. So essentially, there was this Bitcoin Swiss, which was the first broker in Switzerland, 2013. So apparently, the guys from Ethereum were looking, okay, how we can raise funds on in the best setup, tax-wise, regulatory-wise. So they were introduced to one of the fintech lawyers back then, MME law firm, in 2014, February. So essentially, apparently the guy from Bitcoin Swiss invited Vitalik, Charles Hoskinson, Joe Lubin, Gavin Booth. So imagine all these nerds and, like a monster of the crypto industry back in the days, they come in and say, okay, we want to do this. And nobody really understood what really was what they were talking about, no? So long story short, I mean, that was I would say the inception of how Switzerland became what it is today, because there was a demand. Ethereum was the largest ICO that happened in the country, but this triggered, of course, conversation with FINMA, and FINMA has been always very open to talk with different players and to see what is needed, what do they need to do. So then after 2014, 2017, 18 around, they made the first guideline on tokens, so to let people know exactly, okay, well, we consider this to be a simple token, payment token, utility token, and these are asset tokens. So asset tokens is similar to kind of how we test, so it's more closer to what a security is deemed. So then nobody touched that, but you could do mostly whatever you want with the rest. So ICOs, I would say, probably they are not the most popular thing nowadays, of course, but the country evolved to have even now a proper DLT law, which is one of the most advanced. And the rest they have just, I would say, regulated according to whatever the asset provides. So it's not like they are looking to have a different type of categorization just because the technology is this or that. It's essentially technology agnostic, and that I think that have helped a lot. I think other jurisdictions like maybe Liechtenstein or Malta have taken a different approach, but I think after all these years, I think Switzerland remains one of the leading ones.
And regulation in Switzerland is already decentralized for...
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And that was actually one of the, when they were asked to Vitalik, why do you come to Switzerland? One of the different jurisdictions they were looking into, and they say, well, actually you guys have embedded in your system, decentralization. So as you may know, we have seven different presidents which rotate every year, so there is no centralization of power. Then there is a lot of similar to DAOs, so the country works like that, from the small communities to the parliament. So I think that's why it goes hand in hand with crypto and decentralization.
Okay, just quickly about Singapore then, how would you compare that to Europe or Switzerland?
Well, Singapore is similar, in size and I wouldn't say history, because it's a country that has developed a lot very fast in the last 40, 50 years. But they are one of the countries that come very often, and we do the same. I mean, talking about the regulators, they meet every year, to discuss, what is the experience in one place and the other. And Singapore is following quite fast. I would say that they're maybe a bit more conservative, but still very much open. But to get a license there, especially in DLT, is very hard. So.
Okay. So, talk about Brazil again. I mean, how does that compare with the rest of Latin America in terms of its regulatory advancement, would you say?
Yep, there is one thing that I think about regulation that is important, is whether you build regulation in conversation with the market players or not. So, in the case of Brazil, there has been a long tradition of building regulation throughout public consultations. I know that because I participated in building Brazil's internet law, And that was a very interesting example because it was a 5-year public consultation that then was turned into law. And it was a very forward-looking legislation because it basically invited anyone to participate in forming the regulation. And I would say that with crypto, it was the same thing. So Brazil defined the authority that basically deals with crypto, which is the central bank. The central bank created a number of sandboxes, which I think is also a very important approach for regulation. So basically, you bring the market players within your structure, you work with them, you understand what they need, and you build regulation out of those considerations. And as a result, Brazil does have, friendly legislation for crypto. There is a new draft bill that is being debated right now, which proposes, for instance, asset segregation that is also being built in partnership with the market players. So in my view, if you look into the countries that are becoming crypto unfriendly, one of the reasons might be precisely because they did not make the effort to work with the market players. Every country that worked with the players in a multi-stakeholder fashion, listening, of course, not only the crypto market as well, but also the scientific community, the civil society, and so on, they came up with regulations that is much more comprehensive and also actually connected with the real needs of developing the market and also safety and caution and so on. So I think this is the lesson that I take from the Brazilian experience, which is bring players to the table and build regulation with them. The result will be much better than if you do it in a closed cabinet or anything like that.
Right. So Ruth, I mean, Nigeria is not known as a place of great sort of financial infrastructure traditionally, maybe, at least from the consumer point of view. I mean, how much is the government embracing digital currency and digital finance to kind of push that forward to change the situation there?
Okay. In terms of, what I say, financial infrastructure across Africa, Nigeria has one of the most advanced ones. There's like a cashless drive, Naira is another one. We have instant payments, same-day payments. We don't wait for like 2 days or 3 days for payments to come in. We have like instant card payments, and if you perform a transaction right now, someone is expecting to see the money in like 1 minute. If they don't see it in 1 minute, then they believe something is wrong, right? So even like when ACH started, we were like, hey, we did this before you guys. So, but in terms of financial and digital regulations for cryptocurrencies, like I mentioned, in that case, we're still trying to get ahead, but I know Botswana and South Africa has started doing something. For Botswana, you can already have a digital asset license or a trading license to be able to use. I think I saw on the news that Namibia has taken suit, and this is because South Africa is like also taking the step forward. So I guess the biggest economies in Africa, Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya. So if any of these three guys should move first, most times others then decide to move with them. So for South Africa to take that step, it's also most likely Nigeria is going to take, and for Kenya they will take. But for Kenya, I don't know the politics, but like that's the biggest mobile money market. So for anything with digital currencies, it would have to be integrated into M-Pesa for people to just use it seamlessly. They wouldn't want to have something separate from what they already currently have now. So it means the government will have to do regulation for M-Pesa to be able to integrate whatever digital currency or CBDC they want to do into M-Pesa for people to just adopt it from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, what is the kind of rationale for the CBDC that they're putting out? I mean, why have a digital naira?
Why have the e-naira or the digital naira?
Why have a CBDC at all? I mean, this is a big debate in the US, like whether we should have stable coins or whether we should have, national digital currency.
So, like in our case, like I said, we already have like the e-naira, and the first adopters or people to integrate it have to be the banks, and they are already doing that. And after the banks, then you see the fintechs like us and other fintechs, because that's the only way people are also going to adopt it. But I don't know why, but with the whole public blockchain thing, the government still wants something that they can see and they can know where this is, right? And I think like the previous panel mentioned, to control government expenditure or see where government spending is going into, but like a blockchain to basically track all that.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. So Ronaldo, I want to go back to you on this digital public infrastructure, because it's actually quite a revolutionary idea, right? I mean, just maybe give an example of how businesses might be able to transact via this smart contract system. I mean, it really is quite groundbreaking.
I think, like as Ruth was mentioning, there is a lot of financial innovation in the developing world, and the reason for that is necessity.
Right.
So if you look to Argentina now, which is in financial trouble, there's a lot of talk about the role of cryptocurrencies in stabilizing the national currency and basically protecting your savings and so on. So the developing world has been going through financial stress for a long time. This is something that we definitely know a lot about.
Yeah.
So what is the idea behind, for instance, creating a national infrastructure for smart contracts? Reason is Brazil is a pretty large country. It's a large market for crypto as well. It's actually number 4 if you look at about it globally.
Yeah.
There was a time in which more people in Brazil were investing in cryptocurrency than in the stock market, which is very interesting. But now stock market kind of recovered in a sense, but still there's a large percentage of the population invested in crypto even now. And the thing is, there is also the problem of trust. So if you look into the national trust polls in Brazil, as it compares to other countries, if you ask Brazilians, do you trust other people? Only 7% of them would say, yeah, I do.
Wow.
So that is pretty low if you compare it, for instance, even to the United States or European countries. So if you build this smart contract infrastructure, you create one of the very original promises of the crypto space, which is the so-called trustless trust, right? So basically, having the central bank as the promoter and driving force behind this, it allows people to actually innovate in terms of how they will build their contracts. It will allow people to do financing in a completely different way. You can charge interest at lower levels because you have a self-enforcing contract infrastructure and so on. So the impact that I expect about this is actually going to be very significant. I mentioned to you about the infrastructure for payments, right?
Right.
The Brazilian infrastructure for payments, it reached 100 million users in about like 3 months. So when people think about Brazil, say, what are the most used digital services in the country? Generally people think, oh, YouTube, Instagram. No, there's this thing called Pix, which is provided by the government, which has a user base that is now larger than YouTube in Brazil, because people used to do payments throughout it every day. And my expectation is that probably, I don't think we are going to have 100 million people using smart contracts, but we might have 30 million. We might have 45 million in 2 years. And that is going to be groundbreaking. Last thing is, the infrastructure that is being used is open to the public networks. So basically, you are free to build the smart contracts using blockchain infrastructure that is not
So it's
provided.
an open source platform.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just like PIX, the payment infrastructure is open source, the smart contract network is also going to be open source. So in my view, this is really a forward way looking way to do and think about how a country can build not only physical infrastructure, but also a digital infrastructure that has an impact over everyone's life.
So it's like the equivalent of building a road system or a train system or a...
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
In the world we live today, digital infrastructure is as important as physical infrastructure. I think we all know about that. Another interesting case is Portugal. So we talk a lot about Switzerland, but I think Portugal is doing a great job in terms of fostering a crypto market there. And they're relying on this idea also of a digital public infrastructure. So if you think about Portugal, that's where all the submarine cables get into Europe. And there are like so many data centers being created there right now. And this is actually remarkable because in the world that we live today, digital and physical infrastructure, I think they are equally important.
Right. So can you just give an example about the smart contract, how that would work? I mean, say I wanted to buy 1 billion tons of timber from you, and we had a contract to do that. How would that be kind of embedded and played out on the network?
Oh, sure. It's very simple. Like, if you want to buy, for instance, a car from your neighbor, and you need to basically transfer the license to your car, which is in Brazil can be a little bit complicated, but you want to get the money secured, you can basically say, okay, I'll put this money into the digital escrow, and as soon as this license registration appears in your name, money will be transferred in your name automatically. So it's just a matter of information. You're going to see the network will plug into the car transferring license system, and as soon as the license moves to your name, money is unblocked and is deposited in your account. So this is a very simple example, but the amount of new structures you can create on top of that is unimaginable. So we can think of very sophisticated structures that can be built on top of that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, does that create any kind of privacy concerns? So, I mean, doesn't everyone then know that you and I are buying and selling a car with one another?
No, it's actually the opposite, because you can use, for instance, self-sovereign identities in order to do transactions. But not only that, the control of the data in the database is going to be granted to the citizen. So if you think about the Estonian model, Estonia is very well known for their digital public infrastructure as well. The impact of Estonia's infrastructure is actually to enforce citizens' privacy. So every citizen has absolute control about who gets access or not to their data. And Brazil is going to adopt the same strategy. So your contracts are not going to be public unless you want them to be. And of course, for a lot of players, that might be an asset to make them public. But for a lot of players, you want to do it privately, and that's completely compatible with the way this is going to be designed.
Okay. Marcus, back to you. I just want to talk about Mika for a moment, or Micra, as some people say. How ground-changing is that for European crypto?
Mika, you mean?
Mika, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a question mark. I think definitely, I mean, talking about the topic of the panel on the arbitrage, I mean, essentially, I will expect that a lot of the volume is going to shift to Europe once is standardized across the continent what's going on and how do we regulate this new asset. I mean, we as Copper, we don't have yet a stand on what's going to be our new home under MiCA, because as you know, we are UK HQ and Switzerland is also outside of the EU. So essentially, we need to pick a place, but it's going to be much easier to do it once that is in place. For any business until now, it's like, okay, where do we go? Do we go to Estonia? Do we go to Malta? Do we go to maybe France? Or pick the hardest one, which is Buffing in Germany. And after MiCA, it's going to be much easier, no?
Okay. Great. So just final question from me. I mean, you're an entrepreneur in this complicated, confusing crypto regulatory space. How do you deal with this uncertainty as a business? Ruth, you want to start that?
Okay, because it's nice you asked first because for us it's crazy. So how we get to deal with this is we get to work with government groups. So despite the fact that they've not yet had regulations in place, it does not change the fact that they still get to talk about it. And basically we call them lobby groups. So you join those lobby groups, so if they're trying to ask any questions or have conversations, then you get to talk to them and they know you. So if anything comes out first, they get to ask you, hey, how are we going to go about this? What are you seeing in the market? How did you solve this? And in terms of when it comes to KYC, AML, how are you able to solve this? Are you following this guideline or are you using a self-guided guideline? Or the one which is the European standard, the FAFT. So basically that's how we've been able to work with the government officials and still keep running. Yeah, there are some gray areas where it favors you, then there are some areas where it doesn't favor you. So we mostly focus on like where it doesn't favor us and how can we solve that. But in markets like Europe, or like you said, in Canada, etc., like they already have regulations for those markets, so it's pretty much easier to say, hey, okay, we just go pick up a license and this is what we want to do, then we work on that alone. Yeah.
Right. Ronaldo?
Yep, I think like creating trust between regulators and the market is probably one of the first things you need to think about in terms of the structure of how to make things flourish. Again, I think like the model of regulatory sandboxes is one of the most promising ones. So in Europe now there is this extremely interesting experiment by the European Commission in which they launched like a call for proposals, and they actually selected, I think it was 25 projects to be worked out of like a pretty large number of applicants. And in my view, that's the way you should approach regulation. This technology, it's here to stay. I think people think a lot about cryptocurrencies, but as David was talking just before this morning, cryptocurrency is such a tiny form of basically usage for this infrastructure. And I think it also, we have to pay attention to the geopolitics of the world we're living now, right? So I live in a BRICS country, like so there are people talking, oh, is BRICS going to launch its own currency? No, it's not. But probably there's going to be a lot of experimentation in terms of how blockchain technologies will be built into the system to facilitate international payments and so on. And in my view, there are these two things. One, a call for experimentation, which I think Brazil is doing well in that sense. And the second thing is be relational in terms of regulation. If you want to regulate something, especially something new, it might be AI, it might be crypto, build a form of multi-stakeholder regulation design in which you listen to all the stakeholders. Otherwise, you're going to become insulated and you might even lose the train of the possibilities that are actually coming into shape right now. Right. So I think these two things would be, in my view, the way to go.
So Marcus, how do you deal with the complexity of these regulations and the changing nature of these regulations? I mean, it must be quite a headache.
It's tough for, I would say, a global firm. So you need to be, just be flexible, you know. And then I would agree, with Ruth and Ronaldo on both. I mean, you need to have a body, like an industry body that is able to, to transmit the message from the industry. I think the difference between the development world and Europe probably is that Europe is a bit, like the industry is a bit afraid of how the regulator is going to react now, because I think crypto in essence triggers a lot of very very delicate, power balance topics, especially with central banks and different incumbent industries. And that's the difference with the internet in the 90s. So I think we need to be a bit more like robust. We need to talk more, even with competitors. I mean, to be honest, I don't care to talk with guys like Sodia Fireblocks. I'm happy to, because then we can actually find a point that we can take to the regulator. And maybe the last bit. Now what is happening in Switzerland, for example, the FINMA just sent a comments on how they see staking. And apparently they want to regulate it and say, okay, only banks can actually provide the staking with the base that they want to, defend the consumers. You have risks that you don't have in any other products. And then, of course, the federation, the blockchain federation, and different bodies now are trying to talk back to the regulator. So I would say Switzerland is a case of they were very fast, very flexible, but they may be turning into a turning point where they may start scaring a bit of business. So that's something that is, I think, is a learning lesson for other countries.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to open up to the floor a little bit now for a few minutes. We've got like 4.5 minutes. Anyone have a question for Ruth, Ronaldo, or Marcus? Don't be shy.
If not, I can do a break dance here in the floor.
Please go ahead. Anyone? Okay, well, do you have any other questions you want to answer?
No, I don't know.
No?
Okay. Well, thanks very much for attending this session. I think we can close it up 3 minutes early. And thank you again to Marcus from Copper. We have Ronaldo from SDF, and we have Ruth from Bitmama.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.